So Coté, I'm new to tech, which I think there's actually, you could probably make a drinking game. Like, how long in the episode does it take Whitney to mention that she's new to tech, right?
Yeah, everyone's going to be drunk right off the bat.
And the thing is, I'm not that new. I've been hanging around for 5 years, but I'm still building a mental model about all this stuff. There's a lot to understand.
10 years in the future, when you're like the most famous tech personality, people will print up shirts that say, "I'm new to tech." And that'll
I just got here. So another thing is I'm new to corporate life. I never worked at corporations either before I got into tech. And so I'm still building mental models about like, what are all these different possible tech positions? What do they do? And I think moving forward in this podcast, I'm going to have a question that I intend to ask every guest. And I'm going to ask you this time right now.
Okay.
A question to help me build my mental model about job positions in tech. And that is, what is a day in the life of your job?
Oh, well, in my job. Well, let's see. I wake up at 6 a.m. usually. And then I think we covered this with Brian Gracely. I read all of the internet. Facetiously speaking, the relevant internet in my RSS reader.
I get your newsletter. I believe you read the whole thing.
Yeah, and then I make little notes here and there, and then I'll skip fast. Then about 9 o'clock, I get back to things, and I'll either like work on some piece of content that I have. And usually I'll do that as long as possible until there's a meeting. Since I live in Amsterdam, and work in the tech world, it's mostly Californians that are, my coworkers. So they don't wake up until whenever, right? Like way late. So like I very rarely have meetings that I have to go to. And then in the afternoon, on an ideal day, I'll kind of be done with what I was doing, and I can do like what I'll call like, all the little admin shit that piles up. You've got like, someone wants to reschedule a meeting, or I do, and like, I don't know, I got to file expenses, got to do this, do some compliance thing, or, I might need to like get a haircut or like whatever. And so that's hopefully in the afternoon I have that. And then around like 5 to 6, I've got 3 kids and a wife and a dog, and then just there's like a hurricane. And then that's
Do you work for 12 hours a day?
Did I say 12 hours? Oh,
well, you said you got up at 6 a.m., but you implied that you started at 6 a.m.
I got up at 6. I get up at 6, and then basically I stop working stop working. I stop all that at 7:30 and go do all the school routine thing.
Okay.
And I don't know. I only recently count that time as working time because I realized I got to keep up with stuff.
It's fuzzy. As someone who's on camera all the time, I mean, maybe a haircut counts as work. You gotta look nice.
but then also like, I might be traveling, and sometimes I have meetings where I don't have content to work on. So, there's whatever you call that stuff where you're like, there's always internal meetings where you're like strategizing, doing that kind of stuff. And then there's that other work activity, which is like figuring out what you should be doing. And planning it out, like that comes up a lot too.
Yeah.
But there's probably a significant portion of each day you could call research. Like we have a guest here, and I was looking up stuff about them and then listening to a talk. Now, if you think about that in the kind of corporate environment I work in, there's all sorts of internal stuff to keep up with and research, and I gotta be like, what's our strategy, right? Like what's up with this customer I'm going to meet with tomorrow, and all that kind of stuff.
So that helps give me a picture of your life, a day in the life of a DevRel, which I was kind of familiar with, honestly, but I like hearing your version of it very much. Oh no, our guest keeps popping in and out of our broadcast room. I was about to introduce him, but he left.
He's remembering admin shit he's got to do.
That's what I was going to say. I identify very much with the admin shit. And I try to time box my admin shit because you can easily give your whole day to it if you're not careful.
It's true. That's what I've learned is, back in the late 2000s, 2010s, the getting things done, the GTD craze. And then later on, like one of the main lessons I learned from that is like, you've got to figure out the rhythm of your day. And the rhythm of my day is like, I can only be creative in the morning until I kind of like burn it out. And if I'm creative by filing expenses, that counts as being creative. And then I can't be creative in the afternoon. I'll just have really cool business justifications in my expenses, but then I won't be able to do anything in the afternoon. So I got to actually create stuff in the morning.
So Marino, welcome. Please tell us about yourself. Tell us your job title and tell me a day in the life of Marino.
So before I do that, I have to apologize. I didn't realize that when I did attach my YouTube and my Twitch, that it would actually go live. So
we're streaming live. Awesome. Hello, live viewers.
I did not because I'm like seeing Andrew Brown here on the side, like commenting here, and I'm like, how's he able to do that? Anyways, my name is Marino Wijay. I am a solutions architect at a company called Kong. And we focus in on like service mesh and API gateways and AI stuff and whatnot. And I'm also a Canadian. So I live up here in just outside of Toronto. And I'm deeply entrenched in the cloud native ecosystem, working with tools like Kubernetes and Hotel and service mesh and other things too. But also I love community. So anytime someone comes up to me and says, hey, can you be a part of this? Yes, absolutely. Yes.
That's awesome. And I think that's a great job. That's who you are to me, that like outside of any job title, you're just like a pillar of the community. If that could be a job title, I would give you a job title. So what's your job title, your official job title?
So I'm a staff solutions architect, and what I do is about like 60% of managing expectations and managing people. Like it's really strange that I get into conversations and we probably spend 25 minutes of that 30-minute call, deciding what we actually need to do. And then that 5 minutes of actually doing something. But then the other 40% is about technical work. But a day in the life is usually I'll wake up in the morning at around like 5:30, go make some coffee, make some for my wife. And then I'll just like chill out because that's my quiet period, my time to actually maybe think about the day, reflect on what's actually going to happen, or maybe internally freak out a little bit because this might be a very long day and I'll feel a little anxious. But, I'll get my kid ready, take him to school because I've got a little 4-year-old who heads out to school now, which is kind of cool. And I get the time to myself to actually do stuff. And then when I get back to the office, I usually have my first meeting. Like it's probably around like 9:30 when it kicks off, and it's usually a stand-up, which is interesting because doing stand-ups is something I haven't done in a long time. And getting back into this professional services world, you do a lot of that, right? And sometimes I'll have morning stand-ups, sometimes I'll have like evening stand-ups or late afternoon stand-ups. And it's really about status. Like, what are we doing? Where are we at? In my professional services role, I work with one big client, and we pretty much do anything and everything they ask us to do in a good sense, right? It means that sometimes I have to dig deep into something very historical that I used to work on and find relevancy to today's technology, and then bring that story to them and say, here's how we can do this or how we can solve this. Other times I'm there building configurations or pipelines for them to be able to onboard like APIs. But then the greater task is ultimately getting them to production. And it's not just like one team that needs to move to production, it's several. And they become the template for the rest of the organization when they decide we're also going to go into production too. So it's a lot. It's managing expectations, making sure that even though I have clashing meetings across my calendar, to decide which is the most important one to get to, or the one that actually has the agenda, and I'll show up to that one. But it's also the ability to, make decisions for these end users sometimes, because, they may have the technical expertise, but sometimes they need to hear it from an external source to give them the authority to say, yeah, let's move forward.
So it sounds like a lot of technical skill is needed, also a lot of communication skill, and then the ability to prioritize all the time, constantly, what's going to make the best impact. Yeah.
It's a lot of Teams chats. Like I can tell you, I probably have about at least 10 ongoing conversations throughout a week that, maybe we are chatting back and forth for about a good half an hour, or that turns into something of a quick call over Teams and we're trying to decide or get to the bottom of something. But communication is probably the most critical part of what I do. Like if I don't speak, if I don't say something, or if I don't set a vision or a strategy for us to be able to move forward, nothing gets done.
I'm gonna quote you a tweet. I'm gonna say Twitter and tweet the whole time. Just let me do it, please. Okay. You wrote that your last 6 months of doing platform engineering is extremely humbling being in all caps. So I'd like to hear, do you have like a disaster story? I love disaster stories. Or like what humbled you specifically?
I think it's not so much of a disaster. It's just more of a considering that there's so many moving parts and at times there are blockers that you have to just overcome. That is the most challenging part of it all, right? It really tests your patience and your ability to just sit there and really think about a strategy and think about how you can move forward, maybe move in a different direction, maybe offer up an alternative. So I listed a number of different technologies, and as much as it is about technology and about, developing a platform that's consumable, not everything just works together. Like I'm sure you and Victor have seen that when piecing together your You Choose adventure, that things don't just magically work. You can't just deploy that Helm chart and all of a sudden you're getting your traces coming in from OTel. It's a lot more than that. And sometimes it might be due to some limitations on a technology. It might be because there are bugs. It might be because the organization hasn't even thought about it. Sometimes it might be another team that comes in and says, nope, you can't do that because you have to implement search or something.
It's humbling because of all the times you thought, oh, this will be fine. Like get this done in a day. And then like 2 weeks later, you're like, oh,
yeah. Documentation, as much as we need to RTFM, like is not always accurate. And you find that out really quickly when you're live in action. Sometimes I'll sit there and I'll pull an example config from somewhere and we're assuming that it works, but then it doesn't work. And then I'm like scratching my head a little bit, like, why isn't this working? And, I'm off to the side here, pinging some folks in engineering. Hey, this doesn't work. What the hell am I doing wrong or something of that nature? But it's also admitting like, you're not always right. Like there's a subtle, I'm not correct about this. I need to go back and I don't know all the answers, but I got to dig and find out and come back to you.
So a related question. So you said your 6 months of doing platform engineering has been really humbling. So if you right now, today, Marino, could give 6 months ago, Marino, a piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, that's a tough one. The only piece of advice is just literally read the manual, like RTFM as much as you possibly can. I
just know what you're doing.
You can't. Like I know what I'm doing for the most part. Actually, I really don't sometimes. And you have to lean on people. Like you have to lean on others, get their perspective, because the journey that I'm on, like especially with the one client I'm working with, is not just about I know all the ins and outs and I know the way to the end or like to the light of the end of the tunnel, right? It's also about consulting with your peers because they might have seen something very different and they might have given you a better insight if you just have asked them instead of, being very brave and just jumping into it. And sometimes like you also have to be a little bit more, I don't know what the word is. You have to be willing to say, no, it's not going to work, or no, we cannot do this way. Because I'm always used to saying yes and always used to finding an answer. But sometimes there isn't an answer. And it's not because there isn't an answer at all. It's just there isn't an answer right now. And you have to navigate that.
So give us a sense of, obviously generalize and anonymize, but what are these things you're building or doing? Like what is the work?
So the work has a lot to do with an organization that is doing a little bit of everything at once. They're doing some digital transformation while also onboarding Kubernetes and non-Kubernetes environments. Basically, they're containerizing everything. while also embracing technologies like API gateways and service meshes, while also considering like using pipelines and automation, things that they've never done before. So, I'm used to doing things in pieces, but now I have to do everything together. Right. And it can be very daunting because not knowing the answer is one thing, but then not knowing the other side of what's going to happen when you press that button is very scary, right? And then you also have to think about the amount of confidence you have to convey to your audience too, or to the people that you're working with. Like, you can't just be scared about everything that you do. You kind of have to be the champion that just, pushes forward.
Right. You don't want to be like, well, let's see what happens.
And that's just it. Like,
how much do you do everything at once? Like, it seems to me that you'd be like, okay, now we're going to add this incremental change. Now we're going to add this incremental change. Do you really just like, oh, here we go, 10 things at once, bam, let's do it?
Well, as much as I'd love to do things in pieces and iterate in tiny bits, that end user doesn't want to, right? That end user might want to do a number of things at once, but it's really thinking about, if I do this, what else is going to get impacted? What else do I need to think about before I decide to, press that button or push that pipeline? And you FAFO really quickly. Like, I will tell you that much. Like, you will quickly find out where you miss things. And it's also being able to navigate that when you have an unexpected result or unexpected outcome. How do you navigate that outcome? And then go back to the drawing board and say, okay, no, we have to change this, and do it in a very confident manner. Like, I can't just come out to an end user call and say, oh yeah, I didn't know about this, so I'm going to go read the documentation now and I'll come back to you in 2 weeks. You literally have to just figure it out right on the fly, or bring a friend along, or phone a friend, or whatever it is, just to be able to move forward.
Yeah, I think, having worked around a lot of people who either have the word engineer or solution in their title, I think you described a major thing they do, which is like, in a matter of 2 to 5 working days, you can figure out something to do for this particular weird situation, right? Like, just, and not in like a slapdash way, but like in a let's actually do something way, like, and actually come in and I guess find the solution, especially if you're solution engineering. And so, I mean, a lot of what you're talking about, like, it sounds like you're modernizing, and other stuff you would be doing. You're modernizing a platform that someone's applications run on, as we would say nowadays, and just doing all the stuff for that.
Why do you have the title you have instead of a platform engineering title?
So the title that I have is mainly because it's a lot of architecting too, right? At a grander level, it is designing something. The platform engineering side is sometimes I have to be the one that does the work, right? I have to be the one that puts that puzzle together, or most of it together, where sometimes the rest of it is fill in the blanks, because I don't know what your blanks are. I don't know what those variables might be. Or what those values might be. And I need you to fill in those details for me. But here's like an entire structure that you should follow. Now, sometimes like they'll ask me questions. Sometimes they'll depend on me to come up with an answer. And sometimes they'll look to me and say, we've never done this before. Like, what do you think we should do? And then I have to say, here's how you do it. So there's a little bit of that platform engineering. There's a little bit of me actually getting on the keyboard and putting together configurations and stitching things together, jumping into systems I've never even jumped into. Look, I mean, the customer's given me a laptop that I have to use. They've given me an account that I have to log in with. So there's an expectation that I jump in there and do stuff for them. Although, like, I will say, it is scary hopping into someone else's AWS environment and just like turning on something, expecting
horrifying.
it to just, yeah, the probably the most horrifying thing is realizing how ECS is nothing like Kubernetes. Like, yes, they both run containers, but ECS is Elastic Container Services, by the way, for folks that are listening in.
And I think every other time we've used acronyms, it's to avoid using cuss words, which is why I haven't spelled them out for you.
Yeah. So as an example, like ECS, the business reason you do something like ECS or use ECS is because you don't want the overhead of managing Kubernetes, but you still want a capability that's like Kubernetes, except when you have a solution that's very closed and locked down, you lose some flexibility. If you think about how Kubernetes functions, you can customize it in so many ways to make it your own. But when you use a managed solution that has put guardrails in place so that you only do the thing that you're supposed to be doing, you lose a lot of customization. And so you have to deal with that and you have to work around it. And sometimes I'm sitting here testing things out in my own home lab or home environment or cloud environment to see if it actually works. Because saying one thing is one thing, but actually knowing that it works is a completely different beast altogether.
So a lot of what you're going over, well, it's making me think of, the old phrase or saw or whatever that like technology is easy and people are hard. And like, maybe you can help me think through this, but I've always thought like, technology is very difficult, right? And like, as you were just going over, like there's lots of just typing your fingers on the keyboard, typing tech stuff that like is not, it doesn't like flow out easily. It's not like riding a bike. And so like, it seems like that pairing, there's something miscalibrated with it because like people can be hard, but I think there's also lots of situations where like, I guess the technology is the hardest part, but what that makes me think is like, maybe I'm mischaracterizing the idea of people being hard because I always think that means they're just like resistant and don't want to do anything or something. I don't know, but like, what is the people difficulty in this way of thinking about things?
People make interesting decisions that lead them into various kinds of technical debt, right? On one hand, you'll feel that it's easier to use a system because it does the thing you want it to do today, but there's a lack of foresight. There's a lack of, what happens when we want to do this 3 months down the road? And don't really consider that into the entire decision-making process. I think the other thing too, when it comes to people challenges, is that there's a lack of communication. When something's going wrong, a number of folks won't speak up and say something's going wrong or won't ask for help even. And then you get into a cycle of Jira tickets that have never been updated because someone doesn't want to sit there. I don't want to update tickets, but someone else doesn't want to update tickets or indicate that they have a problem or they have a blocker and that they need the help. Like I'm sitting with one particular issue at the moment that has taken us like probably 3 months, not to figure out, but for someone to actually put their hand up and say, I need help. And when you encounter something like that, it's less about the person and it's more about what was broken in the process to begin with. Why did we even let this happen? And why didn't we get them the support they needed 3 months ago so that they can move forward?
Or have an environment where they feel safe saying they don't know.
That too, right? And it takes a little bit of, being in this game for quite a while to be able to put up your hand and say, no, I don't know. But there's also, like you said, the psychological safety aspect of it. Can I safely say that I don't know something without getting yelled at or being told that I should know this? Because that's something that I've experienced in my, early on in my career. And it's really hard to go to someone and say, for me to say that to someone, because I've been there. I know what it feels like when someone tells you should know this, or you should know something, or you should have a solid understanding of it before coming into this. No, we're all here to learn. We're all here to just make mistakes at the same time. At the end of the day, it's just technology, right? Life is way more important. We're just here to pay the bills and, move on with our lives and get to that point where we can retire early. But there is that nature of folks that just won't speak up because they're afraid.
So do you think like that maybe the people side of things, one view of it from maybe all the way back to like extreme programming and agile and I don't know what happened in the late 2000s before DevOps and then DevOps stuff and SRE and now platform engineering. There's always a side of transformation that's like you've got to change your organization and the way that you work and think. And I've never solutioned, but I go and talk with people. And it seems like changing your organization and people around is a very unrealistic expectation. for any technology, right? So like probably in platform engineering nowadays, it's kind of miraculous if you can just get a platform team instead of like some funky matrix situation where you've got various people doing things. And so like, I don't know, in your experience, like, is it reasonable to like, not only you're changing like the technology systems, the tech, but you're also like modernizing the human system of how things are going? I mean, does that actually happen? Or like, what's the rate of that occurring?
So it's going to entirely depend on the size of that organization. For a very, very large organization, it's a lot harder to identify this, know where those gaps are, know who actually needs help and needs the ability to level up or needs some training to have some level of growth, unless you actually speak up, right? But here's the other thing. You have a bunch of project managers that are running around asking for status all the time and then chewing up calendar time because they want to know the status. Meanwhile, you could be using that time to learn, to level up on your own, to effectively accomplish a goal or move past something. And it usually happens when everyone wants to move very quickly, but not together. When everyone's moving like individually quickly, it actually creates a lot of chaos. And that's where you start to see, internal teams not move forward, not complete projects on time, only because one particular engineer might be moving so quickly, but isn't, communicating where they are at. There's another engineer that is very communicative, but doesn't move as quickly enough. And then you have a lot of like project mismanagement or project management going on behind the scenes that they don't even understand where the project sits at times. So having some external entities come in, have an outside view, and then come in and provide a more guided approach to how we can accomplish something is usually often very helpful. Because sometimes as large as, like I've worked in an organization like Dell, and there are redundant teams out there. Like there are teams out there where they're doing one thing and there's another team somewhere out here off to the side doing the exact same thing, but they're not talking to each other. They're not collaborating.
When you're doing your solutioning, do you come into situations where you're like, hey, y'all, what you need is not a tool or a technology. What you need is a culture change. Have you been in that position? Or is that, even if you did see that was a thing, is that something you can say and act on?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I've done that a number of times. Operations is a culture. It's not just about tooling, right? And you have to come out and say, look, in order for someone to be able to move forward or a team to move forward, maybe they need to sit there and engage another team and solicit them for some advice as to how they accomplished it, right? And hearing that from the inside doesn't always work. Hearing it from an external source will work. It actually does make a difference. I can't say that I've won a lot of battles here, but I can say that sometimes some of the things I say resonate, and then they go back and they dwell on it and they realize, oh, Marino was actually correct about this. We should actually be communicating with this team over here because they've already done the work. Maybe we can reuse their work. So we're not having to sit here and rebuild this thing all over again. But it's just, creating that bridge, if you will, for that communication to occur.
So like when you're like walking around at home and kind of experiencing the culture there, like give us a sense for like the ambient nature of like ice hockey. And I ask this because like I'm from Texas, right? And there's just ambient American football everywhere. It's just like dripping all over you. And I haven't spent enough time in Canada. Is it the same where it's just like the Doritos and the cereal have like hockey stuff on them and it's just everywhere, or is it more subdued?
I really should have told y'all to not ask me about sports questions because
no, I'm not a sports person, but that's the question. That makes it even better. Is like, if you are not a sports person, you can gauge the level of this ambience by how much it still is just in your life all the time, right? It's like something that's there.
I totally had an American friend recently ask me where I'm watching the Super Bowl, not whether I'm watching the Super Bowl. My answer was, oh, it's the Super Bowl today. But like, just the assumed, like, where are you watching it?
It's kind of interesting you brought this up and Super Bowl together because yesterday I went climbing and as I got into the climbing gym, folks were greeting me. They're like, "Hey, are you going to watch the Super Bowl tonight?" And I'm like, I don't even know what goes on in football, to be honest. So, all I know is that there's a halftime show, and maybe I'll tune in for that. But that's about it. And the same applies to like hockey too. When hockey season's out and about, like you really see folks get into it. Here in Canada, it's our sport, right? It's a national sport. It's very enjoyable. It's maybe not enjoyable for me to sit there and watch all the time because I've been to a hockey game before, and it's just I've been to a basketball game, however, and the way they move and how quickly they move is also very interesting. But you can see how people really get into it. They really enjoy it. They are passionate about something of a sport, of basketball or hockey or whatever it is. You see the flags, you see the colors, you see people like honking their horns in their cars when we win. I can tell you that back in like 2019, the Raptors won. They won the championship, right? That was probably the only time they ever won in my lifetime, and probably will ever win ever again. But I was on a plane I think I was going to Portugal or something, or I was with my wife. We were going somewhere, and we were on a plane during that final game. You know what people did? They connected their laptops to the Wi-Fi. Everyone was streaming. Everyone that had a laptop was streaming. I was sitting next to someone. I was watching her stream the game, and like everyone was cheering. Everyone was just so into it. And then finally, like when we got that last goal, like the entire plane was like, "Yeah!" and everything. And it was just, it was a sight, right? Like people really get into that stuff. And the same applies to tech, right? When you're on a team or you're working with a team that achieves some success, like just before I got on this stream or this recording, I was doing a testing call. We're testing an environment in stage right now before we move into production. And I had this assumption that we'd be finished our testing in stage like within 2 calls. We had 6 calls to get through various issues because
humbling.
That's the humbling part, right?
Yeah.
Like you never really expect these things to go poorly or well. But after this last call, it's like, yep, we got the all clear. Thank you, Marino. We're good to go. And that's a good feeling, right? Despite the humbling side of it, it's still a good feeling. And that's a cheer.
A couple of times in this call, you've been like, oh, it must be hard when you have a question not to, be able to ask, or you talk like, I don't like sports, but I kind of can get why people like it. And so I've seen you a few times already in this short time. You've demonstrated that what an empathetic person you are, which I think is pretty cool when you show people instead of telling people. But I do know you have a side project thing called EmpathyOps. Will you tell us what that is?
Yeah, EmpathyOps is that was an interesting one. So a long time ago, probably about 2 years ago, I just decided it'd be nice to have a company that I can just do things at the side, not have to engage or involve my main employer, some extra income, but also just an ability to build a brand of sorts that would do something one day. I don't know what it would do, but let's just start doing something. So I started advocating across a set of technologies or a variety of other technologies and helping organizations that were really small just get a leg up in the community space. So a good example is Tremolo, one person company, doesn't have a marketing team, doesn't have an advocacy team. They are their own advocacy and their own engineer. But at the same time, they needed some external advocacy. So I said, all right, let's figure something out and let's work through this. And I realized that there are going to be organizations like that over the next several maybe years that are going to require some marketing, some technical guidance of sorts. And I figured I'd have this at the side so I can build, right? Just keep building. I'll just build in silence and, I'll put noise out there where I can. And for the most part, it's been working because you're asking about it. Other people are asking about it. And it's just a long game. Go ahead.
So EmpathyOps is like a DevRel for hire for we're going to help you do some marketing around one thing, but we're not going to hire a full-time DevRel. Is that
that's how it kind of started off. But I also quickly realized that there are companies out there that don't need any of that, but they need some other kind of guidance. They need some consulting on their startups. They need to figure out how they want to move their startup in a different direction. And it just made me realize, like, it's good to open myself up to other different avenues of businesses that maybe want some of my specialty in different ways. Maybe they just need like a 3-hour session on how to move forward with their open source product. And I can give them that without doing any sort of advocacy.
How does empathy play into that?
So I don't know. The empathy bit was interesting because the name itself was something that Peter and I kind of was sitting through. We were thinking, Peter O'Neill, by the way, if you're wondering. A long time ago, when I started this initiative, he was the one actually came up with the name, and I said, "Okay, we'll run with it," because it was actually in my my Twitter bio, which was at the time DevRel equals EmpathyOps, which actually it's supposed to be. When you're in that developer relations role, it's not just about building content and being out there, but it's also building strong relationships with the community and understanding their own pains. That is empathy, right? Understanding how, what would it take to better their lives somehow or improve upon it. So we just kind of came up with the idea of EmpathyOps. But the empathy bit is just really about, making sure that we understand what people go through. We understand what people need and how they can move forward and give them that, right? Just effectively give them that.
What are the trade-offs for getting just a splash of DevRel versus having a full-time DevRel for your organization?
So I think if you think about an organization, they think in accounting, right? This is just my personal opinion. Every company out there is after the best accounting possible. It's all about accounting hacks, tax hacks, everything you possibly can do to put more money in your pocket or in the business's pocket. So sometimes it's not advantageous for some organizations to hire someone full-time, especially if they don't have a strategy figured out. But that also depends on that founder, right? Have they actually thought about whether or not they need a DevRel strategy? And sometimes they do. Actually, a lot of companies need a DevRel strategy versus an actual marketing strategy, because it's how you first connect with your audience, how you first connect with people that are going to onboard your technology. And if you've seen what startups have been doing lately, they hire DevRels, they hire developer advocates, developer marketers, whatever you want to call them, to effectively just write content. That's not the strategy. Content is an activity of that strategy. But what the real strategy is, how do we ensure that the most amount of people use our technology or use our practices or whatever it might be, but we also maintain those strong relationships with them? And a lot of companies haven't figured that out, to be honest. So they'll hire and fire and retry the strategy all over again, where they think they might find the right one. But it really comes back to them, like the leadership team, the exec team that decides or needs to decide how to best utilize that resource. Because I feel like if you are a developer advocate, you are very multifaceted. You could do a lot of different things. Like, it's not just building content. You could build content while developing very good technical artifacts, while also solving problems for end users, while also solution architecting and solution engineering, while also writing code and adding to the actual application itself or the code base. There's so many things that they can do, and they're the best communicators out there.
So, like I mentioned, I watched one of your recent talks about networking in Kubernetes, which, of course,
how recent was that?
I think it was from how do you say it? Civo Europe thing. So it might be like a year or so old. Yeah, there you go. And I think it was Carl Sagan who said, like, if you want to bake a pie first, you have to invent the universe. It might be misattributed to him, but you did a good job in an hour of like, we got to go all the way back to the stack. And I'll have to find the longer version of as you pointed out several times. But it reminded me of, like, I mean, I was an application developer growing up, so to speak. So I was way up in that level 7 or whatever. But every time I hear like an explanation of the networking stack, and then you get up to a service mesh level, I think, like, why do we have so many layers? Like, do we just need to go to like I don't even know who controls if it's like RFCs or the IETF or whatever. Like, couldn't we just go update that and use that? Because all of these layers, not all of them, but several of these layers, if you box and arrow it, do the same thing, right? Like, especially like if you look at like what, at least the last time I looked at service meshes, what they do, it's sort of like, we've got multiple nodes. You want to have them talk with each other and all the stuff to resolve it. And then you want to secure it and all this stuff. And that's what it does. And then like, if you go down the layer, that's also what it does. And then, there's like subnets and all that kind of nonsense, but it's kind of like, well, why do we need to keep layering stuff on top and on top and on top instead of just enhancing the layer that's below?
Before you answer that, I want to put out a hypothesis and have you confirm or deny. So like every time a new layer, like the lower levels of open OSI models are like actual physical things like wires and actual machines. And then the more layers of abstraction you build on top of computers, like virtual computers, Kubernetes, pods, each one of those layers needs its own way of connecting with other things on that layer. And that's how you end up with so many networking layers in my mind. But now I would like to hear Marino's very professional opinion instead of me making stuff up.
So you both work for VMware, right? At some point?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
have at some point, yes.
So are you all familiar with the technology NSX?
No. Just vaguely, but that's a good example, right? It seems like that seems like a great way to do networking. So why don't we go to whoever's in charge of networking and make all of networking just that? And then you don't have to have these layers on top of it. Or maybe it's a bad way, but like let's just have the networking do the networking. Like I don't think there's multiple plumbing standards within a country. And you don't you don't have this layer of plumbing. Electricity kind of has some layering depending on how you look at it, and it's always bad to analogize between like, one-dimensional software to three-dimensional stuff, but like there's not a lot of engineered systems. I shouldn't say it that way. Like it seems like it's more elegant in an engineered system to have less layers. And whatever, you could talk about pace layering and all that stuff aside, but like 7 is a lot. And then even above the 7th level, within an application, people might add an 8th level of how they're handling all this stuff because they want to abstract the 7th level, right? Like, and so I don't know, it seems like a lot of layers.
So I'll start with a small story and then I'll get a little bit deeper into my more business side answer. A long time ago, I was working for this water pump company, and they had this like really, really old cabling system, like for network cabling. They were using, I think, Cat 3 in some places and then Cat 5 in other places. Category 3, Category 5, just it's a different type of transport, but we're talking about wires here. And those particular systems are limited in certain ways. Like you can't push like more than 100 megabits per second, or in Cat 3, you can't push more than I think 10 megabits per second. And that becomes a limitation. So what do? Well, you call the telco guys and you tell them to come around and layer like more wire on top of that, like additional Cat 6 wire now. Now you can push 1 gig through and possibly 10 gig. But that's the same problem we're solving with things like software-defined networking, software-defined applications, even service mesh. We get to a point where it's just so difficult to replace those lower layers that we start slapping on these additional logical layers on top, because we already have this base layer. We already have the roads in place. Let's just make it a little bit more easier for us by implementing our own little logic on top of what we already know. And that's what service mesh and things like NSX do. They use the existing roads in place because we can't replace them. Well, maybe we can, but not right away. But let's use these existing roads in place and just create logic on top. So it's funny because NSX as a technology, a software-defined networking technology, solved that problem for quite a while until containers really started to take over. And then we realized, we need to implement some more network logic elsewhere to be a little bit more aligned to contain, or a lot more aligned to containers, which is where service mesh comes up. What's funny though is service mesh, and this is just my opinion, right? This is not reflective of my employer or any previous employers I might have worked for, but service mesh was built by developers to solve a networking problem, which was already solved many times before. And this isn't a technological problem. This is a people problem, a communications problem. We didn't have the people that wanted these problems solved talking to the people that were already solving these problems.
Right.
Which is why we have service mesh today. So sometimes you might see me run around and say, service mesh is a VPN. Service mesh should be learned by network engineers. And in fact, it's because they'll naturally understand these technologies.
Right. And so it seems like, I mean, it's like two thoughts there to play around with this is like, one, it seems like, well, I like your framing there of like, I would put it in a jokey way of like, every time there's a layer in a system, it means some people should have talked to each other. I mean, maybe not every time, but frequently. And then the other part of that is like the layers are a reaction to tech debt to some extent. That's not the right way of putting it, but they create tech debt. And your metaphor of the layering cables is interesting for that. That like we can't really fix the underlying layers, but we can layer something on top of it.
But I do think it seems a little flawed what y'all are saying, because if you're adding more logic to higher layers, that means those layers, that networking has a higher compute cost. So you don't want to replace it, I imagine, or you're making the easy stuff harder than it needs to be and paying more for it. Just a guess.
So you are actually hitting something very important, Whitney. Something that is actually going on, and this still goes on, is the reason we put those abstractions and layers on top is so that we buy ourselves enough time to go and address that technical debt. Mm-hmm. Now, a perfect example of this is you decide you want to slap on service mesh into your infrastructure, and it solves a lot of your microservices challenges. But then that gives you the ability to go back to your infrastructure layer and say, I'm going to upgrade these Kubernetes clusters to something later, which also means you might be getting off of very aged, older servers, which might be running on like really old gear or really old hardware. So in some ways, yeah, we're slapping more abstractions on top, but we're really just buying ourselves time to be able to make some decisions around how we want to handle the existing technical debt that we built. Now, if we had, collaborated better many years ago, we probably wouldn't have service mesh. We probably wouldn't even have like software-defined networking. We wouldn't even have containers, maybe. Maybe we would, I don't know. But I really think that collaboration bit is, and the lack thereof, is why we are here today, why we have service mesh.
How can we collaborate better moving forward?
That's a hard one, right? Because there's not enough time in the world to be able to sit there and collaborate across every single technical decision before we get to technical debt. Maybe we might be able to address some of it. And in fact, like the more opportunities we have to break down those silos, like the example I gave about how one team was already able to solve this problem and another team can solve it without having to reinvent the wheel all over again, is how you break down silos, right? But you actually need champions out there who understand multiple worlds. You need people that know all of these things. You need a developer who understands networking really well, who also understands like infrastructure and the way we build things really well, to come in and speak up. But then that's not always possible.
One more thought listening to that is, and tell me if this seems to be true or happen, but it seems like at the application layer, when you look at like, well, this is true of the whole stack, but we'll focus on networking. At the application layer, the way that you architect your applications and what you want them to do can sometimes leak downward into the stack. And basically, like kind of like you were pointing out with containers and the way application developers want to think about networking, it sort of like breaks the layers. Like the layers like don't do that. And then so because they want to operate that way, someone has to come in and add this other layer instead of stripping out the wires and metaphorically and literally speaking.
So you're actually touching on something very, very important. It's because we're impatient. We don't want to wait. We don't want to wait to go talk to our network engineers or our server buddies and say, can you do this for me? We just want to do it ourselves. And that's also another reason why we're here, right? But we're not the individuals that are impatient. It's just we have decision makers up top that are asking us for status.
I think people can get a bigger sense of importance from building something new than they can from collaborating with someone else and making something old that's better, improving. Yeah, I don't know how to fix that problem. That's just some human nature stuff.
we need to add a layer on top of it and worry about it later.
I'm going to change the subject, Marino, and ask you something. I don't know if this is going to feel personal, but I've always wondered. So you're like a Twitter person, and over the years have like amassed quite a big following, and it's been a part of how you express yourself and who you are. So I've always wanted to ask someone in recent months, I've wanted to ask someone who has a big, nice Twitter following how it feels that everyone's moving over to Blue Sky.
It feels good. I'm actually happy that it's happening. I'm at the point where I'm almost ready to abandon my Twitter. The thing is, I feel like there are still so many people that need convincing to come over to the Blue Skies, right? And come hang out there because it's peaceful. It's a little less in your face, and people aren't always argumentative over on the Blue Skies. But at the same time, other people feel like, no, this is the place to be. So
about Twitter.
Yeah.
About X or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, like it's going to take me a lot longer to do that migration. Eventually I'll be off that platform. I don't know when that is, but I have thought about it. Like I've thought about, hey, I'm going to, abandon those 19,000 followers that I have and, maybe start rebuilding again. And that's okay. Right. Like eventually when I stop showing up to that platform, others might stop showing up to that platform and may show up in the Blue Skies again. And that's okay too, right? Like it's a long game. There's no rush to kind of do anything to increase my followership. I think if people really wanted to get in touch with me, they would know how to get in touch with me. The other thing too is like, I also feel like a good chunk of those followers that I have over on Twitter are like bots or something, because I can't half of them don't even interact with me. Yeah. They just follow me and I don't understand why.
Oh, I can relate to that. I'm a total lurker on those platforms. I don't they're just a bunch of people with my personality. Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting how lurking is completely fine. But I also can't identify people at times because they don't have a profile picture that I can recognize in person if I've ever was at a conference. Like, I'll give you a good example. I'll call it Jabril because his profile, you would never know like who he was. And one day when I was at my previous employer's booth at KubeCon, this guy comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, Marino, it's nice to finally meet you." And I have like no idea who this person is until he finally shows me his Twitter profile. And I'm like, "Oh, that's who you are."
Yeah.
But you're not recognizable, right? And so like I encourage people to always use their profile picture where they can, unless they're uncomfortable. That's totally different. But it just makes you much more identifiable and recognizable because now I know who I'm connecting with or who's been interacting with me or conversing with me over the platform. There are people out there that have amassed a massive following but don't have their picture up there, which is also quite strange to me too, because do you want to remain anonymous in person? I get that. I understand that. But you've built a voice, a very strong voice out there, especially if it's a really good one. I mean, people should have that opportunity to connect with you in real life as well.
That's why, I mean, as Whitney knows, sometimes there's no barrier between a thought in my head and my mouth making noises. But one instance of that is oftentimes when I meet someone in person for the first time, I'll say, "You look exactly like your picture." They're always, because it's kind of to your point, it's a little rare, right? Like there's a lot of people who don't have a picture, and then also they often have that picture from 15 years ago when they were standing in front of a mountain wearing sunglasses, or they were like at their wedding dressed nicely. I guess wedding dresses don't show up, but it's always a guy in a or someone wearing a tuxedo. Now, So like you've gone over like working in a lot of, I don't know, high pressure, chaotic situations. That's where a lot of solutioning happens. But you seem like the opposite of that. Very chill and calm. Like almost like you're listening and thinking and processing and just kind of everything's fine and cool. Like, is that do you like work on that, or do you not even realize that that happens?
I don't even realize that. Like, you're the first person that's ever told me that, to be honest. So that's,
Really?
I'm taking that as a compliment. Yeah.
Huh. All right. Well, now we need to find out some more. Like, what did your parents do, or whoever raised you? To
Very chaotic. I had a very chaotic childhood, and I don't know. I think there are so many people I've met throughout the years that, just makes you think about your own life and how good you have it too. And sometimes you don't even have to freak out about certain things because everything is going to be okay. I will tell you, last year, like when I got let go from my previous employer, I was in a state of like complete shock. Like, it was something that I'd never felt before, and I honestly didn't know what to do. But no one actually knew. No one actually could sense it from me. And I guess I just held it in so well. But that also means, like, that's another set of like psychological problems I have to go address. But it has a lot to do with just, spending the time at the end of the day or in the morning, just reflecting on how things could be better, and just not taking things for granted. Like, I after losing my dog last year, it just made me realize, like, you got to spend more time with the people you love, as much more time. Like, that's why I don't travel as much anymore. And I'm fine with not traveling as much, although I will see you in London if you're going to KubeCon, whoever's going to be there, right?
We'll both be there, I think. Yeah.
And that's just one of the things that I look forward to now. Like, if I can maximize the experience by minimizing it and create more of a wanted feeling, like, okay, I'm going to want this more because I do less of it, right? That also helps me feel a little bit more grounded. And realizing, like, there are only so many things you can control in your life is probably part of it too.
The more bad stuff that happens to me in life, the more I trust that it's going to pass and peace will come again.
You've trained yourself, so to speak. Not trained yourself, but have been trained. And so maybe this is a little follow-up question here, maybe for both of you, is like you're saying, in the morning, you take some time to reflect, all of that stuff. I'm not being dismissive, just concise. And, I've been told, and one is told often, you should figure out things that you have gratitude for. Maybe it's a little like cheesy, like a little Adobe Express template about, 5 ways to have a gratitude journal or whatever. But like, I haven't really understood in my mind how that connects to life being cooler, right? Like, cause I can rationally like go through things that have, things that are great and things that I'm grateful for, but I don't quite like I don't understand, are there like some chemicals released and then I'm cooler, or does it like play with my rational mind? Like, what's going on with that it would work?
So there are 3 layers to a moment. There's like what's actually happening. There's the way you perceive what's happening. And then there's the story you tell about what's happening. And so the more you practice gratitude, or the more you've been through trauma, or both, like the more that you can control your reaction and the story. And then in that way you can keep your peace at the center.
I see. So you're sort of massaging your memory and thus perception of what happened, and then maybe what is ongoing happening. So you're kind of like hacking your brain to like think in a way that's better. Well, that aligns better with what you want things to be.
You can fall and scrape your elbow, and you can be really mad about it, and you can dig in on how painful it is and let it ruin your day, or you can immediately just be like, oh, that was no big deal. Like, so much worse stuff has happened and I've survived it. It's fine.
Right. So maybe in that model, well, one, like you're saying, the gratitude thing, it's changing and layering things, but also there's a certain extent of it's just like the, that's what you got on the table, and there's not room for the other stuff. Like that, you've got that in your head, and it kind of weeds out the other things.
What would you like to add, Marino?
I will say having a 4-year-old is probably the most effective way to humble yourself and realize how grateful you are for other things. I I can say that like when you start to see yourself outside of yourself as a 4-year-old running around doing all the chaotic things you possibly can, everything else is just whatever. Like truthfully, everything else is very much whatever. We went to this place called Dino Land on Saturday, which is like, my kid loves dinosaurs. And like for a minute, like my wife and I looked away, like not even a minute, probably like 5 seconds. And he was like not there. And that moment of panic was like, oh my gosh, like where the hell this kid just ran over to the sandbox and he was like trying to dust off like fossils and stuff like that. And it just makes you realize like nothing else in this world matters.
Yeah.
Except that, right? So
yeah.
That's probably why. Sorry, go ahead.
This has been wildly fun. We need to wrap it up soon. And to conclude it, I'd love to hear more. Give you a chance to promote your live stream that you started recently. Will you tell us about live stream on Main and what it is and how we can find it? Yeah.
So a little backstory. I always like to learn new things at the beginning of the year, kind of like how everyone wants to hit the gym as a resolution. And I put it out there on LinkedIn, like I want to learn a few things, Python. Well, I know a little bit of Python, but I just wanted to refamiliarize myself. Plus, get behind some of this agentic AI and just other bits as well. And someone in the community, Ned Bellamance, was like, hey, why don't we stream together? And it just started a conversation where we would build something. And, I usually don't get a lot of time to learn. Like learning on the job is one thing, but learning for my own pleasure is something completely different. And this is that opportunity where we get on stream together and we're hacking away at Python or let's say Amazon Bedrock and trying to navigate how to make something work. And, we see the errors on the terminal and we have to overcome that. And that's what it is. It's really about learning a little bit of Python, learning a little bit about how AWS works outside of just the regular infrastructure stuff, learning where some of this AI stuff is actually going and if it's like really worth investing in, because I also want to give myself a little bit of a boost in that little space that I haven't really had much exposure to other than some of the stuff we've dug into. But here's the funny thing. I never came up with that title. That was actually Ned's title. And live stream on Main. Main stands for Marino, AI, and Ned. So
I was going to ask you.
So that's where that came from. But it's catchy and people enjoy it because it's not like super in your face. It's very slow paced. We're going to be doing episode 5 this Friday. So folks that are listening into this, come check us out. If you want to learn a little bit of Python, go check out some of the previous videos. If you want to just build, just watch us and you can build alongside us. I
find that from your YouTube channel?
Yep. It's on YouTube and I'll post it on Twitter and Blue Sky and LinkedIn whenever I possibly can.
That's hilarious about what Main actually stands for, because it more has that brand feel of like, Main Street Grill, like that, right? Been there forever with all the pictures on the walls, and they have like steaks,
checkered
and
tablecloths.
Like yeah. Well, yeah. Like Whitney said, this has been fun talking with you. We appreciate it. Now you've got your YouTube channel, as Whitney mentioned, but like if people want to, and we mentioned your Twitter, like where should people go to check out more of your stuff?
So I've been trying to cross-post across all my platforms. So if you want to find me on Twitter, you can go look up my handle, virtualize6 with the number 6, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Like just use my full name and you'll find me there, and I'll be posting very similar stuff there as well. I've been trying to actively do a lot more of the technical stuff on LinkedIn because it seems to resonate with that audience a lot better. Only because people actually engage and, they actually care. On LinkedIn, it's just on Twitter, it's kind of hidden by some of the other noise that's out there at the moment. So I try to diversify, but LinkedIn's probably the best place if you want to connect with me or, have a conversation or something.
I was reading this morning when I was reading the internet that like LinkedIn did something like $16 billion last year, and I guess that's like you're saying, that's where all the Twitter engagement went. I mean, it didn't go there, but like there's something over there. I think if you were to do the Venn diagram now of all the social networks, what people have in common, LinkedIn's at the middle, which is like, I don't think anyone would have predicted that the resume hosting site would be, where you'd go to learn about configuring networking or whatever. That's right. Well, speaking about things you would never think of, this has been another episode of Software Defined Interviews. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but when I came up with this name long ago, it's when software defined networking was like the big craze. And I was always running around talking to people 10 years ago being like, what is this? And I don't know if I ever got an answer, but I made a jokey podcast name about it. So
here we are.
That's right. This has been episode 94. So if you want to get the show notes, things that we mentioned, you can go to softwaredefinedinterviews.com/94. And there's also a Slack channel that you can go to. If you go to softwaredefinedinterviews.com, you can find it. And as Whitney and I like to say, if you want to hang out with nerds, all nerd talk all the time. That's what happens in that Slack channel. And with that, we'll see you later, nerds and not nerds.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Whitney. Thanks, Mike.